Welcome to the Untold Affairs. I hope you like the story. Let's begin. The lights of the grand chandeliers were scattering in every direction, and the sounds of expensive crystal glass clashing between the velvet curtains broke the silence of the hall. The annual gala event of the Stratton and Assaman Investment Bank was the epitome of an elite society, where everyone was shining like lifelike statues in their finest attire. There was a grand dance floor in the heart of the hall where couples were grooving with light steps to slow music. Ron Stratton, the bank's co-founder and a charismatic businessman, entered the hall with his wife, Letitia Stratton. Letitia looked gorgeous in a black gown, a delicate diamond necklace shimmering around her neck, adding to the glow of her deep brown eyes. Ron grabbed his wife's hand and the two stood in the middle of the hall. Both of them had smiles on their faces, but there was an invisible wall between them. Ron noticed that Letitia's eyes were repeatedly directed to Andre Aman, the bank's CEO and an old friend of Ron's. Andre was confidently talking to the guests in his signature black suit, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You look a little uncomfortable, Letitia," Ron asked softly. "No, it's just a little headache." "You enjoy the party," Letitia said with a mock smile and headed towards the bar. Ron's gaze did not fail to capture the light-eyed language that took place between Andre and Letitia. His sixth sense was feeling something strange, something that was hurting his heart. Sometime later, while Ron was talking to some important partners of his company, he saw Letitia and Andre walking towards the balcony. Ron interrupted their conversation and slowly followed them. There was a faint light on the balcony, and the twinkling of the city was visible from a distance. There was a strange closeness between Letitia and Andre. Andre gently touched Letitia's cheek and tried to lean towards her. "What's going on?" Ron's voice echoed. Letitia stepped back, and Andre smiled and said, "Oh, Ron, you came at the right time. You seem to have suspected something." "What's going on between you two?" Ron's voice trembled. "Do you really want to know?" said Andre, taking one last sip of his whiskey. "Your wife and I, we have been together for many months. And yes, maybe your children, maybe they aren't yours." Ron's face turned white, his steps faltered, and his heart seemed to be pouring out of his chest. Letitia tried to say something, but the words stuck on her tongue. "It's a lie. It's all a lie," Ron muttered. "You can't run away from the truth, Ron. You can deceive yourself as much as you like, but the truth is in front of you," said Andre coldly. Ron clenched his fists. His breathing quickened. Letitia stepped forward and tried to hold Ron's hand, but Ron shook her off. "You two made fun of my life. I hate you." Ron left the balcony with brisk steps. As soon as he came back into the hall, he felt that all the voices, all the lights had turned against him. Every face seemed to be wearing a mask. Her marriage, her trust, everything was shattered. In the darkness of the night, Ron was sitting alone in his car. He had a bottle of wine in his hands and tears in his eyes. The foundation of her marriage, which she had believed in, had collapsed in an instant. Letitia stood on the balcony, watching Ron leave. There was a look of remorse on his face, but it was too late. Andre stood by, his eyes twinkling triumphantly. The sound of the car's engine echoed in the silence of the city. Ron Stratton's world, which seemed perfect until yesterday, was now shattered. The silence of the night was slowly dissolving into the faint light of the morning. Ron Stratton's car was racing on the deserted streets of the city. His eyes were red, his face tired, and his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Andre's words rang in his ears. "Your wife and I, we have been together for many months, and yes, maybe your children. Maybe they aren't yours." Ron stopped the car on the side of the road and put his head on the steering. Her breathing was quick, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. Her perfect life, her marriage, her children, everything was shattered in an instant. A few hours later, sunlight pierced her tired eyes. He wiped his face and started the car and headed straight for home. He stopped at the door of the Stratton mansion. With heavy footsteps, he entered. Letitia was sitting in the living room. His eyes were swollen, and the cup of coffee in his hands was trembling. Ron looked at her. His eyes met for a moment, but then Ron turned his face away. "Ron, we need to talk," Letitia said in a trembling voice. "The thing? What's left to talk about, Letitia?" Ron's voice was cold and harsh. I can explain everything. It's not what you're thinking. Do you think I'm an idiot? I saw you and Andre myself. I heard the truth from his mouth. You betrayed me, our relationship, and our children." Tears flowed from Letitia's eyes. She came close to Ron, but Ron pushed her back. "I don't want to hear your explanation, Letitia. You have broken my trust. Do you know how much it hurts?" Letitia got down on her knees. Her sobs echoed through the room. "Ron, I beg your pardon. I have made a mistake. I was weak. But I love you. All of it. It was all a terrible mistake." "Mistake? It's not just a mistake, Letitia. It was an intrigue. You cheated on me with my best friend." Ron took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney, Santiago Lutz. I will get both you and Andre out of this house, this company, and my life." Letitia was trying to say something, but Ron raised his hand. "Don't say anything now. I'm leaving this house. I don't even want to see you until this matter is settled." Ron picked up a bag, stuffed some clothes into it, and headed for the door. "What about the kids, Ron? He wants both of us." Letitia's voice was trembling. "I'll keep them with me. And I will make sure that you don't even have a shadow of them." The door slammed shut, and Ron Stratton's shadow slowly faded into the darkness. The next day, Ron met with Santiago Lutz, a well-known lawyer. Santiago was an experienced and clever lawyer, famous for his arguments and schemes. "Ron, I need a full explanation of your case. Any evidence, any messages, pictures, everything," Santiago said. "I'm sure there must be evidence between Letitia and Andre. I want us to win this case. The custody and company of the children, everything remained with me." "All right, Ron. I will put this case on my top priority. But you have to be prepared. This battle will be long and difficult." Ron nodded. "I'm ready. I am willing to put everything on the line. But I cannot lose this battle." Letitia Stratton, on the other hand, was sitting alone in a room at the Stratton mansion. All around him were expensive furniture, gleaming chandeliers, and so many luxuries, but all that seemed hollow to him now. He looked at Andre's message on his phone. "Letitia, everything is going according to plan. Don't worry, I'll get you out of this." Letitia threw the phone away. She knew that what she had done could never be rectified. That night, Ron sat alone in his new apartment. There was only the faint light of a desk lamp in the room. There were pictures of children on his desk. "I'll never leave you," Ron said, looking at the photos. There were tears in her eyes, but on her face, an image of resolve and toughness emerged. That night, Ron Stratton decided not only to rebuild his life, but that he would take account of every single injury from Letitia and Andre. The room was dark. The faint light coming through the window was just highlighting Ron Stratton's tired face. The dark circles under his eyes, a slight growing beard, and slanted eyes indicated that he had not slept peacefully for the past several days. On the table in front were scattered pictures of children, some pictures of Letitia and Andre, and papers from DNA test reports. There was no sound in the room except the ticking sound of a clock. Ron slowly picked up the DNA report and looked at it intently. The words on the paper faded before his eyes. "Test results inconclusive." His hand was trembling. On the one hand, she hoped that her children were her own, and on the other a fear, which was constantly haunting her soul. He put the paper back on the table and fell in his chair. A few tears rolled down her eyes. Then a message came on his phone. "Ron, we need to talk. I can explain everything to you. Please give me a chance. Letitia." Ron read the message but didn't reply. He knew that no words made any sense anymore. There was silence in the room again as his phone slammed on the table. The next morning, the sun's faint rays peered in through the apartment window. Ron put on his jacket and picked up his car keys. He went straight to Santiago Lutz's office. Santiago Lutz was an experienced lawyer with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. He was sitting behind his glowing desk in a black suit. As soon as he saw Ron, he closed his file and stood up. "Ron, sit down. I've started working on your case. We have evidence gathering, but we have to go deeper." "Santiago, I need custody of the children. I want to win this case. And I want Leticia and Andre to realize their mistake. I assure you, Ron, we will win this battle. But it won't be easy. Leticia's team will adopt an aggressive strategy. And Andre, he'll play dirty games. We have to take every step carefully." Ron nodded and Santiago handed over some documents to him. "These are bank statements and some messages that were exchanged between Andre and Leticia. This will give us a strong position on the court." Ron looked at the documents. His hands were trembling, but the fire of determination was burning in his eyes. That same evening, Ron was sitting in his car and heading to the court. Santiago's words rang in his ears. "This fight will not be easy, but we can win it." The atmosphere in the courtroom the next day was overwhelming. Every seat was occupied. Lawyers, spectators, journalists, everyone was watching the case. The judge took his chair and the hearing of the case began. Santiago Lutz put forth his arguments with all seriousness and accuracy. He showed the court records of messages, bank transactions, and conversations between Leticia and Andre. "Honorable Judge, these evidences clearly show that Leticia Stratton and Andre Aminat only abused Ron Stratton's trust, but also dragged his children and company into their conspiracy. Leticia's lawyer, Lauren Baxter, did her best to defend her side. Honorable Judge, my client has made a mistake, but should there be such a severe punishment for one mistake? Is it right to take children away from their mother?" Ron's eyes met Leticia's. There was a pause in his eyes. No anger, no hatred, just an emptiness. Then the DNA report was presented in the court. The judge read the file carefully and said, according to the test report, the paternity of the children belongs to Ron Stratton. Ron took a deep breath. It was as if the heavy stone on his soul had been removed. There was a stir in the courtroom. Leticia closed her eyes and tears flowed. The judge further said, "This court has ruled that full custody of the children is granted to Ron Stratton." Leticia's world seemed to stop there. Ron heaved a sigh of relief. A slight smile appeared on his face, but there was also a deep sadness in him. Leaving the court, Santiago patted Ron on the back. "We won, Ron." "No, Santiago, we've only won one battle. But the struggle to give my children a normal life again is yet to come." Ron stepped towards his car. Leticia was sitting in her car somewhere in the distance. There were tears of remorse in her eyes. In the evening, Ron arrived at his apartment. Her two children came up to her and hugged her. Ron's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, will you always be with us?" "Yes, my children. I'll always be with you." That night, Ron looked out of the window and looked up at the sky. Every ending is a sign of a new beginning. The darkness of the night had covered the city. The Stratton mansion, once full of light and brightness, was now shrouded in silence. Leticia Stratton was sitting alone in a room. The bottle of wine in the corner of the room was half empty. She had a picture of Ron and the children in her hands, with tears dripping down it. His eyes were red, and deep streaks of remorse appeared on his face. Did I really fall so much? Was it all just a mistake, or did I intentionally ruin my world? He muttered to himself. The phone's screen suddenly flashed, and Andre Amin's message came. "Leticia, we have to talk. The police are behind me. I'm leaving town. You take care of yourself." His heart broke once again. Andre, for whom he had staked his family, was now running away, leaving him alone. He threw the phone away and hid his head in his knees. Ron Stratton, on the other hand, was sitting in his apartment with his children. There was a slight smile on his face, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. The two children were sitting next to their father, laughing and playing. Ron held his daughter's face and said, "You both are my life. I will never leave you alone." After the children fell asleep, Ron stood on the balcony. A gentle breeze touched his face. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of the city were shining. Moments spent with Letitia and Andre flashed through her mind. "I trusted you, Letitia. You were my world. And Andre, you were my best friend." The next day, a special meeting was convened in the boardroom of the Stratton and Axeman Investment Bank. All board members, shareholders, and senior officials were present. Ron stepped into the hall solemnly. There was confidence in his gait and at-winkle of determination in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we stand at a critical juncture. This company was built on trust and honesty, but some people used it for their own selfishness and greed. Today, I will present you with evidence that will prove that Andre Amon misappropriated the company's funds and interfered with my personal life as well." Some documents and photographs were displayed on the big screen. Misuse of funds from bank accounts, private messages, and CCTV footage of the hotel. There was silence in the entire hall. Andre, who had joined the meeting via an online video call, said angrily, "It's all a lie. It's a ploy to trap me." "This evidence doesn't lie, Andre." "Your game is over," Ron said sternly. The chairman of the board paused in his voice and said, "Andre Amon is removed from the position of CEO with immediate effect, and a formal investigation is ordered against him." The video call was disconnected. Ron took a deep breath. There was a slight stirring in the hall. The board unanimously announced Ron Stratton as the interim CEO of the company. Letitia saw the news on TV. She tossed her empty wine bottle aside and got down on her knees and started crying. Was this my destiny? Did I ruin everything with my own hands? He picked up the phone and tried to call Ron, but the call was not received. Ron was now fully attentive to the company and his children. He launched new projects to strengthen the company. Her days were spent in the office and nights spent with the children. One evening, Ron and his children were sitting in the park. A gentle, cool breeze was blowing and children were playing. Sophia, Ron's younger daughter, came up to him and said, "Dad, are we happy now?" Ron said with a slight smile, "Yes, my angel, now we are happy. And I promise you that no one can take away your joy." The same night, Andre Amon was arrested by the police at an airport. There was a look of disappointment and defeat on his face. All his property was confiscated and his image was completely destroyed. Letitia wrote a letter to Ron, making one last try. "Ron, I'm sorry. I know I have betrayed your trust and that of the children. But I just want to tell you that I truly loved you. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I hope one day you can forgive me." Ron read the letter but did not respond. He put the letter in a drawer and took a deep breath as he looked out of the window. Sometimes forgiveness isn't enough. Over time, Ron Stratton embarked on a new life with his children. The Stratton and Aceman Investment Bank had regained its lost reputation. Ron stood on the balcony and looked up at the sky. The stars sparkled in his eyes. This is not the end. It's just a new beginning. The darkness of the night had spread its velvet blanket over New York City. Ron Stratton stood on his office balcony, a mug of coffee in his hand and his eyes fixed on the city's twinkling lights. There was a slight chill in the air, but Ron's mind was restless inside. The company had slowly regained its credibility. The children were now safe and happy, but somewhere in his heart, there was still an unfulfilled heart. There was a faint noise from behind the balcony. It was Santiago Lutz, who entered with a file in hand. "Ron, I think we need to discuss a few more things." Ron looked back at her and walked in. "What have you got, Santiago?" "This file is of some of Andre Aman's old investments. It contains details of some bank accounts that are still active. It seems that he had already prepared a backup plan for himself." Ron picked up the file and began to turn the pages carefully. "So that means he's still trying to reestablish his network from somewhere?" "It's possible. We've got to work on this right away, Ron." Ron closed the file and looked at Santiago. "Track it down. I want us to make sure that he doesn't do any harm anymore." "All right. I'll put my team on it." Over the next few days, the team in Santiago traced some suspicious accounts. These accounts were linked to banks in Bahrain and Qatar. Andre Aman, who was in prison, was still controlling these accounts through some means. Ron had a secret meeting with his team. "We have to get over it. Andre Aman's network is still alive, and it may someday become a threat to us again. We have to root it out." Leticia Stratton was still in the darkness of her loneliness. There was always moisture in his eyes. She tried to call the children several times, but Ron had made it clear that she could not contact them unless the court allowed. He looked out of the window of his small apartment. Children were playing in the street. Pain appeared in his eyes. Will I ever be able to correct my mistakes? A few weeks later, a new information came from Bahrain. Santiago handed over their port to Ron and said, "We have frozen all of Andre's bank accounts. Now he cannot transfer money from anywhere. All its resources have been exhausted." "Great job, Santiago. Now he's completely broken." Andre Aman, once a shining star in the corporate world, had now become an ordinary prisoner behind bars. He had no money, no power. He sat alone in the small prison room, his hands trembling, and a hollow sadness in his eyes. Ron organized a big event for his company. It was attended by investors and business leaders from all over the world. He stood on the stage and handled the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today I can say with pride that Stratton and Axaman Investment Bank has not only regained its reputation, but we have also thwarted those who tried to destroy it. This is not just a business win, it is a victory of trust and honesty." The hall erupted in applause. Ron looked at his children with a slight smile, who were sitting in front of him. A few days later, Ron and his children were vacationing at the beach. The sun was setting, and the waves were touching their feet. "Dad, is everything okay now?" asked his daughter. "Yes, my angel. It's all right now." Ron took a deep breath and looked at the distant ocean horizon. He held his daughter's hand. Leticia approached the court. She applied for permission to visit the children. Ron heard the news and was silent for a while. "Should I give him another chance? Has she really changed?" Ron said to his lawyer. "Give him a chance to meet the kids. But with conditions. I want to make sure that she's really changed." One Sunday, Leticia came to visit the children in the park. She was wearing a light pink dress and had a small gift bag in her hands. The children saw him and came running towards him. "Mom!" Leticia embraced him, and tears flowed from her eyes. "I missed you so much." Ron was watching this scene from a distance. There was no smile on his face, but there was a slight relief in his eyes. At night, Ron was sitting in his office. He opened his diary and wrote in it, "There is a twist in every story where the protagonist has to decide whether he will leave the past behind him or move on or remain immersed in the same pain. I fought my battles, and I'm moving forward." He closed the diary, looked out of the window, and saw the city shining in the moonlight. Sometimes, forgiveness is the greatest courage. The silence of the night deepened around the Stratton mansion. The faint lights of Thessaly flickered on the window panes. Ron Stratton stood on the balcony of his apartment, holding an old picture in his hand. In the picture, she, Leticia, and their 2 children were smiling. The comfort and confidence that was seen in that picture was now lost somewhere. Ron took a deep breath and put the picture back in his coat pocket. There was a slight hardness on his face along with fatigue. as if he was making himself strong from the inside every day. The next morning, Ron filed a new plea in court. He had agreed to give Letitia limited visitation rights with children, but with some strict conditions. Santiago had advised her that it was most important to maintain a stable and safe environment for children. "Ron, it's not going to be easy. Letitia is still mentally and emotionally unstable. It'll be a good thing for the children, are you sure?" said Santiago in a serious tone. "I'm doing this for my kids, Santiago. It would not be right to keep them away from their mother completely. But I'll be vigilant every step of the way," Ron said firmly. Letitia was getting ready to meet the children after the court's decision. She wore a light white dress and took some gifts for the children in her hands. There was panic and apprehension on his face. When she met the children in the park, the two children came running to her. "Mom!" ! Letitia took him in her arms. Tears flowed from her eyes. "I've missed you so much, my children." Ron was standing at a distance watching this scene. His heart was getting heavy, but he kept himself calm. "Ron, will I ever win your trust again?" asked Letitia in a low voice. Ron looked at her. "Letitia, some things never fully reconnect after they break down. But I will ensure that the children are not harmed in any way." Letitia nodded with a slight smile and sat down with the children and chatted for a while. On the other hand, Stratton and Axeman Investment Bank had completely stabilized. The company's new projects were achieving great success in the market. Ron started attending every meeting in person. Under his leadership, the company had regained its lost prestige. One evening, Ron was sitting in his office looking at reports on the company's new projects. Just then, Santiago entered the room. All the cases against Ron Andreaman have now reached a decisive point. There is enough evidence against him, and he is going to receive a long sentence. "That's good news, Santiago. I want this chapter to be closed forever." Letitia now lived alone in her apartment. She was slowly trying to take care of her life. She had started working in a small NGO where she used to help battered women. This work comforted him a little, but there was always an emptiness in his eyes. A few months later, Ron was moving towards a fresh start with his children. He bought a new house on the outskirts of town. It was green, peaceful, and there was a large garden for the children to play in. "Dad, this house is so beautiful," said his daughter excitedly. "This is our new home. This is where we will have a new beginning," Ron said with a smile. Ron began to spend time with the children. She had made it her routine to drop the children off at school, do homework with them, and tell stories at night. One evening, Ron was sitting in his garden. The sun was slowly setting, and a gentle, cool breeze was blowing. His daughter came up to him and laid her head on his shoulder and said, "Dad, everything is good now, isn't it?" "Yes, my angel. Everything is good now," Ron said with a slight smile. There was a sparkle of relief in Ron's eyes. He had fought for his family, for his company, and for himself. Time broke him, but he reunited himself. A new chapter in his life had begun. Ron Stratton's life was slowly becoming normal. Moments spent with the children, the success of the company, and the peace of the new home, all of this made her feel like a new beginning. But the wounds of the past still healed somewhere. Some questions, some incomplete answers, and some moments that stuck in his heart. The Stratton and Axeman Investment Bank had now reached a new high. Under Ron's leadership, the company's profits were higher than ever. There was a glow of confidence on the faces of the employees, and the trust of the board members was now completely resting on Ron. In the evening, in a private conference room in the office, Ron and Santiago Lutz were sitting. There were some legal documents on the table between the two. Ron, Andre Amon's case is now completely over. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. "This case is now a closed chapter for us," said Santiago coldly. "And Letitia?" asked Ron. "He has filed another petition with the court. She wants to have more rights to meet the children. The court has given a date for hearing on this." Ron's eyes rolled down. He took a deep breath and looked at Santiago. "Do you really think she's changed, Santiago?" "I don't know, Ron, but people can change. Everyone makes mistakes, but some people correct them. It's up to you to decide." Ron nodded. "I can't decide. I want my children's lives to be stable, without any further setbacks." Letitia, once the queen of the Stratton mansion, was now living in simplicity in a small apartment. He had immersed himself in NGO work. Every day she would help women, listen to their stories, and try to ease their suffering. His eyes were often fixed on his phone. Maybe she was waiting for a call or a message. One day, she received a notification of the date of the court hearing. His breathing quickened. He looked at himself in the mirror. Dark circles under his eyes, fatigue on his face. But there was also a new firmness. There was silence in the courtroom. Ron Stratton, Santiago Lutz, and Letitia Stratton sat face to face. The judge began the hearing. "Letitia Stratton, you've admitted your past mistakes. You have filed this petition for the right to meet the children. Do you guarantee that there will be no negative impact on the lives of children from now on?" asked the judge sternly. Letitia raised her head and looked directly into the judge's eyes. "Honorable Judge, I have suffered the punishment for my mistakes. I lost everything, my home, my reputation, and most of all, trust your children. I'm trying to be a better person now. I know that confidence will not come back in a day, but I am asking for this opportunity so that I can correct my mistakes little by little." Ron listened attentively to Letitia's words. There was a slight suspicion in his eyes, but also a hint of hope somewhere. The judge thought for a while and then said, "The court partially accepts this petition. Letitia Stratton is allowed to meet with the children once a week, but the meeting will take place in the presence of an observer." Letitia bowed her head, wiping away tears. Ron took a deep breath. A few weeks later, Letitia came to visit the children for the first time. The meeting was taking place in the presence of an observer. The children looked at their mother hesitantly at first, but then slowly moved towards her. "Mother, will you come back to us now?" asked the younger son innocently. Letitia had tears in her eyes. "No, son, I won't bother you again and again, but I'll see you every week." Ron stood at a distance watching all this. There was no clear expression on his face, but there was a slight relief in his eyes. A few more months passed. Ron had perfectly balanced his life. He spent more time with his children. The company was now in safe hands under his responsibility. One evening, Ron was sitting in his garden reading a book. The sun was slowly setting. His daughter came up to him and said with a slight smile, "Dad, we're all happy now, aren't we?" Ron smiled and said, "Yes, my angel, it's all right now." She closed the book and hugged her daughter. Letitia was still engaged in the work of her NGO. She was trying to incorporate herself slowly into the lives of the children. She knew that she might not be able to regain Ron's trust, but the love and respect of the children was slowly returning to her. Ron Stratton, who had endured betrayal, conspiracy, and immense pain, had now entered a new chapter. He saved himself from breaking up, protecting his children, building his company. He looked up at the sky. The faint light of the moon fell on his face. The silence of the night permeated every corner of the Stratton mansion. The children were sleeping in their rooms, immersed in deep sleep. The faint moonlight peeped in through the window and cast a silvery shadow on the floor. Ron Stratton was sitting in his study room. Old files, some documents, and Letitia's recent court notice were placed in front of him. A faint light flickered in the room and broke the silence by the ticking sound of the clock. Ron picked up a document. These were Letitia and Andre's bank statements, which contained traces of their secret transactions. These proofs were now outdated, but they were the same evidences that shattered her marriage, her faith, and her life. He looked at the papers, then gently closed them and put them in the drawer. Just then, there was a gentle knock on the door. "Dad?" It was his daughter. She stood holding a teddy bear in her tiny hands. "What happened, Angel? Why haven't you slept yet? I had a dream, Dad. I'm scared. Can I sleep with you? Ron, with a slight smile, picked up his daughter in his arms and made her sit in his chair. There's nothing to be afraid of, my angel. I'm always with you. The daughter rested her head on Ron's chest and fell asleep in a few moments. Ron looked at her and felt her innocence. He knew that his biggest responsibility was the future of these children. The next day, a large press conference was held in the main hall of the Stratton and Aceman Investment Bank. The bank recently signed a landmark investment agreement, which took the company to new heights in international markets. Ron stood on stage, a look of confidence on his face. The cameras were turned towards him, and the journalists were ready for questions. Mr. Stratton, you've seen so many ups and downs in your personal life. Yet, you handled your company so strongly. How has your journey been? Ron took a deep breath and came closer to Mike. Every journey is difficult. Every man has his own battle. I lost a lot in my life, but I learned that in any storm we must persevere. This company is not just a business, it is my family's legacy, and I won't let it break. Applause erupted throughout the hall. In the evening, Ron was sitting in his office working on the company's new plans. Then a message came on his phone. Ron, can we talk? Just once. Letitia Ron stared at the phone for a while. Then she took a deep breath and replied to the message. See you tomorrow, in the park. The next day, Ron and Letitia were sitting face to face in the park. Children were playing around and a gentle, cool breeze was blowing. There were deep marks of remorse on Letitia's face. He lowered his eyes. Ron, I know I didn't leave you unforgivable, but I'm here for the kids. I just want you to trust me a little bit. I'm really trying to change. Ron looked into her eyes. Letitia, once trust is broken, it takes years to reconnect. You betrayed not only me but our children too. But I can't take you away from the children's lives. It's just for them. Tears welled up in Letitia's eyes. I understand, Ron. I just want one more chance to prove myself to my kids. Ron nodded slowly. I can't see the kids suffering. You can meet them, but with conditions. I'll keep an eye on every move. Letitia sighed and bowed her head. Time passed. Letitia gradually began to improve her relationship with the children. She would take them to the park, read stories with them, and help with their homework. Ron watched all this from afar. Sometimes there was a faint hope in his mind that perhaps things could get better with time. One evening, Ron was sitting in the garden with his daughter. The sun was setting, and a slight cool breeze was blowing. Dad, are you happy? Ron picked up his daughter in his arms and said, Yes, my angel, I'm happy, because your smile is the greatest joy to me. Ron looked up at the sky. There was a slight smile on his face and a glint of contentment in his eyes. Letitia was still associated with her NGO. She would help women organize fundraisers for children. He gave his life a purpose. Ron Stratton fought the toughest battles of his life. She extricated herself from the darkness of betrayal, pain, and failure. Now she had her children, her company, and most of all, she had peace. Over time, every corner of her life was slowly beginning to fill up. Ron Stratton stood by his office window, overlooking the twinkling lights of New York City. He had a mug of coffee in his hand, and his eyes were lost somewhere in the void. There was a slight tiredness on his face and a shadow of deep thought in his eyes. Today, the company had finalized a major deal, which took Stratton and Aceman Investment Bank to new heights. But despite this victory, there was a void left inside him, which perhaps even time could not fill. There was a slight knock on the door, and Santiago Lutz entered the room. Ron, there you have it. The final documents of today's deal, Santiago said, placing the file on the table. Thank you, Santiago. None of this would have been possible without you. You've suffered a lot, Ron, but when I see you today, I feel proud. You not only took care of yourself, but secured the future of your company and children. Ron sat down in the chair with a slight smile. It wasn't an easy journey, Santiago, but I knew I couldn't lose. The smile of my children is my biggest victory. In the evening, Ron arrived at his home. There was a relaxed silence in the house. The children were busy with their homework. Ron took off his jacket and sat down beside them. "What are you doing, my lions?" "Dad, I'm doing my math homework," said the son excitedly. "And I'm finishing my painting," said Betty, showing her canvas. Ron hugged both of them. "You two are the most precious part of my life." After the children went to sleep, Ron stood on the balcony. The moon was shining in the sky, and a slight cool breeze was blowing. Letitia, on the other hand, had slowly brought her life to rest. She had helped hundreds of women through NGOs. But every night, when she sat alone in her room, she would regret her old decisions. She wrote a letter to Ron. "Ron, I don't know if I'll ever regain your trust, but I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet the children. I'm trying to be a better person now. If you can ever forgive me, know that I will always pray for you and the children." Letitia put the letter in an envelope and posted it. A few days later, a parcel arrived at Ron's office. She opened the envelope and read Letitia's letter. He placed the letter gently on the table and took a deep breath. In the evening, Ron was sitting in the park with the children. The kids were playing, and Ron was sitting on a bench watching them. Then his eyes fell on Letitia, standing on the other side of the park. He looked at the children and bowed his head with a slight smile. Letitia watched the children from a distance, heard their laughter, and then turned around and left. Ron took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. Time passed. Ron took his company to new heights. Her children were growing up, and there was a glow of joy and security on their faces. One day, Ron arrived at his daughter's school event. Her daughter went on stage and gave a speech. "My dad is my hero. He taught me that no matter what the odds are, we should not give up. My dad is the best dad in the world." Ron's eyes moistened. She hugged her daughter. Ron had fought the hardest battles of his life. He had rebuilt himself from the wreckage of betrayal, pain, and shattered dreams. He knew that every story has an end, but some stories never have a complete ending. Letitia repented her mistake and started a new life. She became a part of the children's lives, but she always took care of Ron's respect and boundaries. Andre Amon, who once wanted to conquer everything on the basis of his devious tricks, was now living an anonymous life behind bars. Ron Stratton stood on his balcony. The sound of the waves of the sea, the cool breeze, and the stars shining in the sky. Everything was quiet. He took out a picture of the children from his pocket and looked at it with a slight smile. Sometimes the biggest win is that you find yourself reconfiguring after a breakup. Ron took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The painful pages of his life were now left behind, and a new dawn was knocking before him.